For everyone joining us. We will get started in about another minute. All right. I know we still have some people joining, but we have a lot of material to cover, so we will go ahead and get started. Before I hand it over to Art and Scott, just a few announcements for you. This webinar is not for CPE credit. If you do have any questions related to the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A box located on your menu bar, or you can use the chat feature. We'll do our best to answer all the questions that we can. If we cannot answer your questions during the webinar, we will answer them offline after the webinar. All right, so we're going to go ahead and turn this over to Scott and Art and get started. Go ahead, Art.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's Tuesday, May 19th. My name is Art Wiederman. I'm a partner at HMWC CPAs and Business Advisors. We are going to be merging with the wonderful firm Eide Bailly in July. So on our call today, we have our usual suspects. We have Scott Haberman. Scott is a partner at Eide Bailly out of Fort Collins, Colorado, and his practice is primarily working with dentists, and he works with a lot of the Eide Bailly clients in the Western United States. We have Dan Bywater, Vice President from Ready Capital, who's kind of been our guy regarding, how do we make application for these PPP loans? What are the banks doing? What's the SBA doing? And then we have Megan Mortimer, who has been and still is the congressional lobbyist for the American Dental Association, and has been incredible with her information and her sharing and her access to what's going on in Washington, D.C. And folks, this has been a breaking news day. Megan, I think it seems like every Tuesday they come up with breaking news for us, right?
They know we're doing this webinar, so just to mess with us, they send us information right before.
They're just messing with us. In fact, I told everybody that if they do this again, we're all just going to have a glass of wine and we're just going to hold up like this, But we don't have that yet. We're not quite there. So we got some things we want to show you today. The primary gist of what we're going to talk about is the fact that the government, the SBA, Friday at about 7:30, 8 o'clock on Friday night, Megan, I think it was, came out with their forgiveness application. Now, you told me weeks ago that SBA likes to issue stuff at the end of a day or at the end of a week, so they don't have to deal. Did you tell me they don't like to deal with the press or deal with backlash or whatever?
Yeah, so that's every agency. My entire time lobbying, it's either after 4:30 on Friday whenever big rules come out.
Okay, so they did that. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So let's go through our agenda and we'll get to all the breaking news here as we go along. So I've got everybody here. Let's see. Yeah, we're going to start off with what are we going to do. We'll give you a couple of keys as to what not to do with the money. The breaking news is not on the discussion topics because that broke about an hour ago. We're going to talk about the loan forgiveness application that they put out on Friday, the form, what the changes are, what they added. They added some new terms, observations, and at the end of the day, folks, what this has done for Scott and I and Megan and Dan is it's really allowed us to wrap our arms around this thing. And basically, at the end of the day, there's 3 specific reductions to forgiveness that are going to reduce the amount of forgiveness. And we've actually created an Excel spreadsheet using the form that we're going to show you here in a little bit to show you how this works. And we'll talk about the rent, utilities, interest. So let's go ahead to go to the next slide. So we've been telling you for the past 7 or 8 weeks, what do you do with the money? You have to spend it 75%. Well, we wanted to kind of show you an example of maybe what not to do with the money. And this was in the media. So apparently there's a gentleman by the name of Maurice Fain. And if I remember correctly, I think my partner Pam Chamberlain sent this to me. He's on a reality show called Love and Hip Hop Atlanta. He was about a week ago arrested on federal charges for bank fraud. He was accused of getting a PPP loan under the name of Flame Trucking. So he had a trucking company. He put in a PPP loan application with the United Community Bank, claimed that his business had 107 employees and $1.49 million in average monthly payroll. There you go. Next slide, please, Amy. So what he did was the next day, instead of paying those 107 employees, he went ahead and bought himself about $85,000 in jewelry. He bought a Rolex presidential watch. I mean, if you're going to buy a Rolex watch, don't buy a senatorial watch, buy a presidential watch, right? A 5.73 carat diamond ring. I don't know if that diamond ring was for him or for somebody else. And of course, you know, when you're this guy, you got child support, so you got to pay $40,000 in child support. So the SBA in their press release said, quote, "Such payments are not authorized uses of PPP funds under the CARES Act." Megan, would you agree with that statement? Do you have to think about that much?
I would agree with that statement.
Art, what if he included the Rolex watch in his W-2 compensation?
Okay, there you go. See, that's why Scott is really a smart guy.
What if he hung the watch on the wall and used it as a clock and therefore could consider it an operating expense, maybe?
I think so. In fact, Megan, I even think that if he used the watch maybe to protect patients from aerosols and stuff,
Sure.
maybe we could even go to Congress and it could be considered PPE equipment.
Totally.
So there you go. So, you know, obviously we put this up for a little humor because this whole situation requires humor for absolutely. And I want to put down, now I am not part of Eide Bailly. I do not speak for Eide Bailly, but I will speak for Eide Bailly. Scott, on this situation, we at Eide Bailly and HMWC do not recommend that you use your PPP money like this. So
Correct.
I think we all agree with that, but I thought you would enjoy that. All right, next slide, Amy. Okay, I want to go back. Do we have the video that that we can show? That video.
Mhm.
So again, my partner Pam, one of her clients, shared with me her, and we can play this video, Amy. So hold on before you play it. Hold on before you play it. So this is a video that was produced by one of our clients. They gave us permission to put this up on the on our webinar and for me to use this. And they use this and they put this onto their website. So it's about a 2-minute video. I'm gonna play it for you. So go ahead and then I'll tell you who made it. And we have sound, I hope, right? So I wanted to let you know, folks, that this was produced by the owner of this practice, who's in Orange County, by his 12-year-old daughter. Is that remarkable or what? I remember, I mean, 12-year-olds are brilliant. They know more about computers than we all do. And again, Pam, this is one of Pam Chamberlain's clients, and she sent this to me, and we got permission from our client to use this. And again, I'm not vouching for its accuracy as far as CDC guidelines or everything like that. All I'm saying is that this is something that this dental practice did to put up on their website, because it isn't, Megan, one of the number one things that the ADA is trying to help the public understand is that it's safe to go into a dental office.
Yeah, as long as we have the proper PPE, it's safe to go in a dental office, and it's one thing that we're definitely working on.
And it's funny because Scott, before we get into this whole thing, let's just talk a little bit about what you and I have been seeing with our clients. I will make the observation that I've been talking to my clients, and some of them here in California have opened or have been open for emergencies and are just starting to open up. I know Colorado is pretty much open, right?
Correct. Yeah, a number of my clients in Colorado are opening, and they've been going for a couple of weeks now.
So what we're hearing is I'm hearing from a lot of people I'm talking to, many of the elderly patients are a little reticent to come into the dental office, and the consultants are saying, maybe we'll schedule you for a month or two down the road. You feel a little better, or we're here when you need us. And a lot of the patients are talking more. I'm hearing my clients are saying they're scheduling 70 minutes or 80 minutes for a hygiene appointment, because what's happening is that everybody is going to talk to you, doctors, about their COVID-19 experience, whether they know somebody, whether they have heard of somebody, what their life has been like over the last 2 months. And you need to listen, because these are your patients, and that's part of building trust and all the caring. So, everything that you can do to reassure your patients that they're in good hands, and that everything that they're doing, you're doing in your office, is providing the maximum amount of safety against this virus, and things like this video. I just thought it was absolutely wonderful. And again, the fact that a 12-year-old went ahead and did this is absolutely amazing. So anyway, with that, I think maybe we now go to breaking news. So there's a breaking news. Amy, maybe go the other way a little bit for a second. Keep going. Yeah, there you go, right here. So Megan, the Hill is that's like Washington, D.C.'s capital newspaper, right?
It's one of the Hill Rags. We call it Hill Rags. These are publications that all of us in DC read regularly.
So I am not checking my email, folks. I'm going to read you what was on this article. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Monday that the administration is working on expanding the loan period for the Payroll Protection Program, PPP, to give small businesses more time to spend funds. The restaurant industry leaders that were at this meeting at the White House asked Mnuchin and President Trump in a meeting at the White House on Monday to expand the loan period, which is currently 8 weeks, to 24 weeks. Mnuchin said he's working on a, quote, technical fix, but didn't commit to 24 weeks. Quote, I'm not sure that it's that long, but I've spoken with SBA, Small Business Administration, that's administering this program, committee, and there is bipartisan support, so we're working on that. Now, the interesting thing, Megan, is that when the Democrats came out with their CARES 2.0 bill that was passed by the House last Friday and was indicated that it's dead on arrival, is what they said, that also had an expansion to 24 weeks. So have you heard bipartisan support for this? What have you heard?
I have heard there's bipartisan support for this. There definitely is in the House. The Small Business Committee that you referenced usually doesn't go forward with policy unless it's kind of bipartisan. I don't know if 24 weeks, again, I feel like that's a pretty big number, and I don't know if we can get bipartisan support on that. But there is a lot of bipartisan talks about extending the loan forgiveness period.
Now, let me ask you this from a technical standpoint. Can this, because of the fact that the 8-week period is in a federal law, does that require an amendment to the CARES Act? Does that require a new law passed by Congress? How would that work?
So that is the question that we are also asking. There were some de minimis exceptions put into the law that Treasury and SBA could have some flexibility. I don't know if Congress would allow them to do this without a congressional, legislative push. I was under the impression that that couldn't happen last week, and now with Mnuchin's statements, I'm unclear as if they could move forward, especially when he says technical fix. That can either mean a small bill with a technical fix in it, or the agency provides some sort of technical fix. So that's unclear.
But if it's a bill, it's got to be passed by the House. It's got to be passed by the Senate. Are they in Washington now?
They're in recess next. It wouldn't happen until June, at the very earliest. June, the first week of June. They're not.
Where's my glass of wine, Megan? Until June.
So,
huh?
again, it's all up in the air. If Treasury does this on their own, I would like to see how they legitimize it without congressional action other than the de minimis exception that's in there.
So Scott, so this bodes the question. We have our doctors who got their money in mid-April, late April, early May, because we're now in late May, I guess. And they've been doing what we've been telling them to do, which is get the money, put it in your bank account, put all your employees back on payroll as if there was no pandemic, and spend this in 8 weeks. So, I talked to a doctor this morning, and he said, well, I did exactly what you told me to do, Art, which is a scary thing when a client says that, right, Scott?
Sometimes it is.
Yeah, it's scary. And then we say, then I said, here's what they said. And the problem is that what do? So you put everybody back on payroll. You've pulled them off of unemployment. Some of them are now making theoretically less money than they were making on unemployment. And now Congress and the president and the Treasury Secretary and the SBA say, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to give you an extra 8 or 16 weeks to spend this money, right? And so you go back to your employees, Scott, and you say, okay, well, guys, here's the deal. So we really don't need all of you because we're doing a slow opening because that's what's going on. So now that I put you back on payroll for 3 weeks, we're going to take part of you folks off of payroll and put you back on unemployment. How does that go over with the dental team?
Yeah, you don't want to go through this roller coaster. It's already a roller coaster enough. And yeah, how do you communicate that message? It's just the whole lack of clarity right now that we keep on spinning around and around, waiting for more guidance.
I think, Megan, the message to everybody is at this moment, you have to spend this money in 8 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and again, this was really intended for the restaurant industry that isn't opening. I mean, most dental practices are able to open, albeit slowly. And I can't imagine that SBA or Treasury would put forward forgiveness that wouldn't require you to retain your employees if you've already rehired them back. But again, you and I have seen some missteps from them and lack of clarification, so who knows?
Well, so anyway, and we'll just have to see what happens. But folks, for now, this is the law. So let's go to the next slide. We already went through our friend here, so let's go. Okay, so go back one, please, Amy. All right. So there was some questions that a lot of our clients, and I think, Scott, you told me you had a lot of your clients asked too, is they were concerned about that they, one of the certifications that you signed when you did this was basically that you didn't really have any other sources of liquidity or credit, and that you really needed this money. And I had clients who called me up, and my manager, Sam, sent me emails and said, Art, I got like 4 calls today of doctors that are afraid they have a $100,000 line of credit. They have liquidity. Does that mean they have to give their PPP loan back? Well, Scott, I guess they clarified that, didn't they?
Yeah, they clarified that last week, saying that you have deemed to have made that certification, and we're not going to audit you if your loan in aggregate with all affiliates included is $2 million or less, or is less than $2 million. They're not going to take a look at you, which is probably the majority of the dental practices out there, except for some of those larger group dental practices. They might have obtained a loan a little bit more than that.
Okay, so we don't really have to be worried if your loan is less than $2 million. You don't have to worry. Go to the next slide, please, Amy. And then this is just, and then go ahead and the next slide. This is basically the what it says from the actual frequently asked question, which is number 46, I think it was. So when submitting a PPP application, all borrowers must certify in good faith that current economic uncertainty makes the loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations. SBA, in consultation with the Department of Treasury, has determined that the following safe harbor will apply. Go ahead, Amy, to the next slide, please. And basically what this says, folks, is that if your loan is less than $2 million, they're not going to look at it. They're not going to audit you. It even says in the last sentence, it says SBA has determined the safe harbor is appropriate. Borrowers with loans before this amount are less likely to have access to adequate sources of liquidity. And they even say in the last sentence, Megan, given the large value of loans, SBA has it finite audit. We don't have the resources. SBA is saying we don't have the resources to audit all these loans. So we're just going to look at the ones that are over 2 million. Now, we're going to show you in a minute the PPP forgiveness application. And the underlying portion, I cannot be more adamant that you remember this. Be sure there's a box on there that asks if your PPP loan is over $2 million. Unless there's someone on this webinar who owns 30 or 40 dental offices and you got more than $2 million in a PPP loan, make sure you don't mark that box, because if you do, Megan, they're going to audit it, right?
It'll be automatic.
Automatic. Okay, next slide, please. All right, forgiveness application. So go ahead, Amy, would you put up the forgiveness application, please?
Sure thing. Let's see.
So while Amy's doing that, SBA did this the cart before the horse. They absolutely did this the cart before the horse. And they put out the application before they put out the necessary guidance that they were supposed to put out by the 27th. So if you could make this a little bigger, Amy, that would be great. This is the form that was put out at about 7:30 p.m. On Friday night. It's 11 pages long. If any of you do have your wine ready, or you have some Advil or Tylenol, get it out, because this thing is a beast. I would say, is that an accurate statement, folks? It's a beast. So page one, this is just the instructions. Amy, let's scroll down this slowly here, and let's go back up a little bit. Go back. Let's see, back up a little bit, and right there, stop there. So a couple new things that we're gonna point out to you. We're gonna get into in great detail. We've all believed that the covered period starts on the day that you get the money into your bank account. There is a brand new term that was introduced Friday at 7:30 p.m. East Coast time called an alternative payroll covered period. We're gonna get into that. Let's go ahead and scroll down. And then the calculation, other way, Amy, I'm sorry. So let's keep going. And then they define payroll costs and non-payroll costs. And we're going to get into all this in the slide. So here's your application. You have to put your loan number how many employees at the time of loan application, how many at the time of forgiveness application. That doesn't have as much to do with this, because there's schedules to fill out. You have to put down what your EIDL advance amount is. That's the $10,000 or $1,000 an employee. What your payroll schedule is, we're going to talk about that. So let's scroll down to where it says line 1, line 2, line 3. So this is the forgiveness calculation. And basically at the end of this calculation, this is the amount of the money that you are going to claim as forgiveness. So I'm going to kind of go over it in a 35,000-foot view. You're going to start with your payroll costs. Remember that the 4 things that you can pay through this PPP is payroll costs, and we're going to get into that. Your business mortgage interest payments is line 2. Your business rent payments are line 3, and your utilities are line 4. Okay, and then let's scroll down a little more. And at the end of this, we're going to give you a comprehensive, an actual mathematical example of how this works. Then what they're going to do is, let's go back up a little more, Amy, if you would, please. Right there, perfect. There's 3 reductions, folks, and this is the gist of what Scott and I are going to talk about today. It's 3 reductions. There's a reduction that you have to spend the first reduction is on line 5, which is that salary hourly wage reduction. If you pay people less than 75% of what they were making before the pandemic in the 8-week period, there's a reduction. All right. Then line 7 is a quotient reduction for your full-time equivalent employees. If you have fewer full-time equivalent employees on June 30th than you had on February 15th, there's a second reduction. And then line 10 is your payroll cost reduction. And again, for me to sit here and explain it all to you like this, I just want to show it to you. And basically what's going to happen, and then we'll show you a mathematical example. We've created a sample dental practice to show you how this works. And then line 11 is the forgiveness amount. We believe, Megan, there should have probably maybe been a line 12 and a line 13 that remember that if you get a $100,000 loan and you get it all forgiven, and you got an $8,000 EIDL grant, your forgiveness will not be $100,000, it will be $92,000 because they're going to take the grant off because you got $8,000 of free money. So Amy, let's just keep scrolling down this. We're not going to spend a lot of time.
And Art, that ties into what we've been talking about all along, right? The payroll test. So getting all your employees back onto payroll, the count, the number, and then also the total dollar value to the rate, the wages. And then the third one is you got to use 75% of the loan proceeds on payroll for full forgiveness. And so that doesn't really depart from the message that we've had, all along and what the intent of the law has been. So that's all that ties into the law and what we've been saying this whole time.
And by the way, folks, if they do extend this period, that does not change anything that we're talking about today. All it's going to do is change the dates. It's going to change it from 8 weeks to 16 weeks, Megan, or 24 weeks, or whenever they decide. So these are all the certifications that you pretty much made when you applied for this loan. I'm not going to go through them other than take a look down here, folks. The information provided in this application, the information provided in supporting documents and forms is true and correct. I understand that knowingly making a false statement to obtain forgiveness of an SBA guaranteed loan is punishable under the law. Now, when you filed the application, Megan, as I remember it, it just said that you could be subject to federal fraud charges. It didn't give any dollar amounts, I don't think. Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't believe it gave dollar amounts either.
Right. Well, now they give dollar amounts. So it says here, if I do this, I am subject to imprisonment of not more than 5 years and or a fine of up to $250,000. And then under federal law 15 U.S. 645, by imprisonment of not under 2 years or a fine of not more than $5,000. I guess, one is for somebody who took their dog as a full-time equivalent employee, and the other is for the guy that bought the rings and stuff. And if submitted to a federally insured institution, Dan, what would a federally insured institution be?
That'd be a bank. That'd be any lender you're getting these loans from.
Okay. Imprisonment of not more than 30 years and or a fine of not more than $1 million. So folks, the government's serious about this. If you don't use this money in good faith for what they're intending you to do, the government's gone $3 trillion into debt. They might go another $3 trillion. For people like this gentleman who did what he did, he's going to jail and he's going to lose a bunch of money. All right, let's keep going down. Scroll down, just show everybody. Keep going down. I want to go through this pretty quickly. And you're going to sign these certifications. Then it gives you the instructions for Schedule A. Schedule A is the schedule that you're going to fill out to figure out what your payroll costs are. And then we're just going to keep going down. Let's just keep going. I don't want to go through this whole form because it'll take the whole hour and a half. So here's the Schedule A, folks. And this is how you're going to compute what your actual payroll costs are. And again, we're going to, we'll quickly, Scott, why don't you quickly go through what's included in payroll costs?
Yeah, so payroll costs are composed of what we've been saying previously of compensation for employees up to $100,000 annualized, and then also the retirement plan contributions on their behalf as well, in addition to that 100,000 annualized amount, and then also the health insurance contributions on their behalf as well, paid by the company. And then the one last piece is the state unemployment taxes that are paid with the payroll costs. So those 4 items are included in the payroll cost calculation.
Right. And we're going to get into what was made clear and what was not as we go along. And then also on line 9 is the amount paid to owners, employees, self-employed individuals, general partners. So remember that is limited, and it's in this form, to $15,385. Then they give you the way to calculate the full-time equivalency reduction. We're going to go through all of that. Let's just keep going. I just want to show everybody the form. Then they talk about cash compensation, average FTEs. We're going to get into all of that. They give you a lot of definitions. It would be a really good idea, folks, if you, if you read this form, with some vodka or some bourbon or whatever your drink of choice is. They're showing you how to do the salary hourly reduction. They give you a worksheet here. We're not going through this right here. We've got an example later. And then there's safe harbors, which we'll talk about. So we just want to show you the form. Let's keep going. Amy, I don't want to spend time. Then this is going to be the form. And I suspect that Eide Bailly, HMWC, the ADCPA, we're going to have spreadsheets to do some of these calculations. This is where you go employee by employee. How much did you pay them? What are they? Are they a full FTE, a half FTE? And what's the reduction? Again, we're going to get into all that. And this just kind of walks you through the safe harbor and then the instructions on the Schedule A and how to figure that out. So let's keep going. Just scroll down. Payroll and non-payroll costs.
I think that's documentation that's
there's
required by
documentation.
the banks.
Yeah, we're going to require a lot of documentation. So, all right. So let's go back to the PowerPoint, guys. This is the form. You should read it. If you're having trouble sleeping at night, definitely read it. This is what we want to do. So the SBA issued this form. Scott, I think you and I are in full agreement that the cart came before the horse, right?
Yep.
I mean, they issued this form, but without the guidance and the questions. So Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said in a release that the guidance from the SBA was coming soon. So I tried to figure out soon, and I remembered I'm a big baseball fan. My son played college baseball and all this stuff. So the Chicago Cubs actually won the World Series in 1908, and I remember reading in one of Ken Burns' books is that they had asked fans, when did they think that the Cubs would win a World Series title again? And many of them said soon. Well, their next World Series title came 108 years later in 2016. So I hope it doesn't take 108 years for us to get this guidance. Megan, I think they call that sarcasm here in California, right?
It's sarcasm here too, Art.
Okay, there you go. So it's no matter what. So we're waiting for this guidance. Again, I early in the game, I would ask Megan, like every time I talk to her, Megan, do we have guidance yet? I've stopped, right? I've been pretty good about that. I haven't asked you.
Yeah, and you caught the application before I did. I had refreshed it like literally 30 minutes before, and then you sent me a notice. So you won that time.
Which means I have less of a life than you do, I guess. Well, when you're responsible to thousands of dentists between webinars and podcasts, I've done 25 webinars. Eide Bailly's done a bunch. Scott's done a bunch. You kind of have to be on top of this. Let's go to the next slide, please. Amy, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so let's get into the meat of some of this stuff. So what they did is, remember the rule that said that you had to spend this money in the 8 weeks under the covered period. And the covered period, folks, was the period starting on the date that we got the money. Remember, early in the game, we were all hoping on these webinars that you could start spending this money when your dental office opened. They didn't let you. On April 8th, which seems like forever ago, they said, once you get the money, that's when the 8 weeks starts. Now, they created a brand new term Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, called an alternative payroll covered period. So what the form says is that if you pay twice a month, twice a month or more frequently, for example, maybe weekly, that you don't have to use the covered period as the first day. So your 56-day period starts, well, if you use the covered period, starts the day you get the money. Let's go to the next slide, please, Amy.
And Art, that's for payroll only, correct? Not the non-payroll costs.
Correct. This is we're talking payroll. So if you have a biweekly payroll or more frequently, basically what this is going to allow you to do is to start your 56 days on the first day of your first regular payroll period that starts after you get the money. So the best way to explain it is like this. Okay, your payroll period is biweekly. So Megan, my reading of this is that if we have a doctor who has a semi-monthly 15th and the last day of the month, they have to use a covered period that when they get the day they get the money. That's how I read this. Scott, Megan, is that how you read this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it says more frequent than, biweekly or more frequent. So May 2020 payroll begins. Your payroll, you've got every 2 weeks, begins on May 11th, ends on May 25th, and your next payroll period begins on May 26th. So if you get your, and this is the perfect storm here, if you get your loan deposited into your account on May 12th, your next payroll period doesn't begin until May 26th, right, Scott? Do I have this right? You looked
Correct.
at the slide
Yeah,
beforehand,
yeah,
of course.
next payroll period. Yep.
Okay. So in that case, we can wait 2 weeks to start paying payroll and have it covered and to meet the covered period 8-week rule. So I can delay my payroll period in this example from May 12th until May 26th. Now, this does not help any of you who have gotten this money in the last 3 to 5 weeks and who have been following what we believed were the rules, which is to start spending it the day you got it. So please, any of our HMWC clients that I've talked to, and I've talked to a ton of you, please do not call me after this webinar and say, Art, you gave me bad information. I gave you the information that was available at the time. So if we can delay the opening of the start of using our PPP money for payroll, this puts us closer to either opening your office or having a full payroll. So in this example, if I got the money on May 10th, the first day of my next payroll is May 12th, so I don't have a delay. So you want to take a look if you have a biweekly or weekly payroll and see if you can delay starting to pay people, which is what we want to do, because obviously there are a lot of dental offices in this country that have opened, but there's also a lot that have not opened, right, guys? So let's go to the next slide, please. So this was interesting, Megan. You got an email, right? You got an email from a doctor. We will not identify the doctor, of course. That doctor is somewhere in the United States of America, who said, you know what? I haven't paid payroll since March 15th. I am not putting anybody back on payroll until I open my office. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say my next payroll period is June 15th. Well, there's nothing in this document that says you can't do that, but that really doesn't go with the spirit of what this law says. So is your next payroll when you open your office? That's not what the law's intention was, because could you take the position that my next payroll is going to be the first time I open my dental office. So I'm just going to hold this money till I open my office. That is not what the intent of this law was. So I would suspect, Megan and Scott, that there might be guidance coming out here.
Yeah, I would expect that for sure.
Yeah, that says that you've got to basically probably use your payroll period that you were using on February 15th or February 29th or whatever it is. So, for those of you who have not received your PPP money yet, can you change your payroll period? I wouldn't change a payroll period until I consulted with a labor law attorney and until we saw this guidance.
And Art, when are we getting that guidance again?
Soon. We're getting it soon. We're getting it soon. We're getting it when I break the course record at Pebble Beach or at Kiowa or Torrey Pines or whatever, which will be never. All right, next slide, please, Amy. Okay, So this is another change that they made that's going to help us. We were all worried about the fact that if we have 8 weeks, our payroll periods weren't going to fall nice and tidily into 4 2-week periods, because they don't. You know, the dates you get the money, the bank didn't say, oh, by the way, let me make sure I conform this to your payroll period. They gave you the money when they gave you the money. So what they said is that if you have a payroll period where the payroll is paid and incurred, the final payroll period, and if the payroll runs during your covered period, but you don't actually pay the payroll until after your covered period is over, that they're going to let you to include it. So here's an example. So say the last day of your covered period or your alternate payroll covered period is June 28th. And by the way, folks, in the rest of this PowerPoint, which I mean, again, I cannot take credit for the PowerPoint. Amy, who is the wonderful lady that does these PowerPoints at Eide Bailly?
That is Rachel Mitchell.
Rachel Mitchell is my new best friend hero, and I will buy her a large cocktail, as I will Megan and Dan and Scott when I meet them ultimately. She is amazing. She put this PowerPoint together. So in the rest of this PowerPoint, you'll see me referring to just covered period. That also includes alternate, because to write covered period and alternate payroll covered period, we would have been here all day. So that's what I'm talking about. So your period is June 28th and is within your 56-day period, but your next regularly scheduled payroll is to be paid on July 5th, which is after day 56. So even though the payroll is going to be paid after the end of the covered period, it's still allowed to be included. So Megan, they're letting us actually include payroll that's paid after the 56 days if it's for the covered period, which is a major reason, and I know I have this in here. You do not want to file your forgiveness applications with Dan on June 30th. Dan, there's no reason to do that, because June 30th is a huge date. Now, are the banks, let's take a break here and say, Dan, are the banks and the financial institutions gearing up for this onslaught of 4.5 million applications they're going to get for forgiveness?
Yeah, I think right now there's a lot of digestion going on right now about how we're going to handle that, how it's going to look. You know, there's talk of, you know, on our end of things at Ready Capital, making it more electronic through a portal. But yeah, it's going to vary differently. Pretty much like the initial applications, it varied differently with every bank. The forgiveness side is probably going to vary quite a bit as well. But yeah, right now I think everyone's just trying to figure out what it's going to look like and how we're going to do it.
So let me ask you a question, Dan, because this is really important, and I've talked to some of my clients about this, do you think it's going to be possible for me to call you up once we get all the final forgiveness guidance and everything, and you get your marching orders from the SBA as to how you underwrite this forgiveness calculation? We have the form, but you don't have the guidance yet, so you're not ready. Do you think I'm going to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, Dan, can you walk me through some specific scenarios? If my client does A, B, and C, do you think that's going to be forgiven, or do you think this is going to be kind of, you're going to do your calculation and it is what it is? Not that I am in any way, shape, or form trying to cheat or work the system. I just want to know what the rules are. Am I going to be able to ask you as the underwriter what the rules are at your bank?
It's interesting because we actually had a meeting this morning about this, and again, this is just discussion and we haven't decided yet, but part of the discussion was actually to advise people to go to their CPA and have them work with them and come up with whether they're doing it right or not. Because I know exactly.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
I immediately thought about you when that was brought up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's going to be some ability to do that, whether by email or phone call, to say, hey, what do you think about this, or what should this look like? We're doing that already with these applications. You know, we're going back and forth. In fact, a lot of these applications, I have some files I've sent 4 or 5 new applications to be signed because I caught problems with it and we wanted to get it corrected up front. So I think there will be a little bit of that give and take on the forgiveness side as well.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide. I want to get through all this information. It's a lot.
And maybe, Art, maybe just to make a mention, be aware, because I think we might have brought this up on a previous webinar, but be aware of what's the bank's requirements of when you need to submit the forgiveness application. They might have a time period of 30 days, 60 days, 90 days after your cover period is up. So just make sure that you're aware on your loan documents when you need to submit that to your bank.
Because the bank could very well say you submitted it 2 days too late, you get no forgiveness, and there's no appeal. Also, Megan, I don't think, do we know anything about an appeals process yet, or Dan?
I haven't seen any formal appeals process for either EIDL or PPP, either not for loan forgiveness yet, of course, but whether or not you were denied the loan in the first place. I'm also curious to see whether or not that 60-day period of when the lenders have to process the money and let you know if it's been forgiven, if that is also going to be able to be achievable by SBA.
Now, yeah, we'll have to see. All right, let's go to the next slide. So again, we talked about the covered period, 8 weeks, 56 days. They make it very clear in this, it's 56 days. And the 56 days includes the day you get the loan. So let's be clear on that. So again, if a borrower got their money on April 20th, the first day of their covered period is April 20th, not April 21st. And the last day of their covered period is Sunday, June 14th. Next slide, please. And again, we talked about this is the whole same thing. This is the example that is actually out of the document. So I picked a lot of the stuff out of the document. In the second paragraph, it gives the example. If you got your proceeds on Monday the 20th and the first day of your first pay period following the PPP disbursement is the 26th, then the first day of your period is the 26th, and then the end of your alternate payroll covered period is the 20th. So it pushes it 6 days forward. So if you want to, you know, this is not working the system, folks. This is following the rules that the SBA is setting. If you are just getting your money and your payroll period isn't, next one doesn't start for a week or 10 days, you've got a week or 10 days that you can have this money sit in your account. You don't have to pay employees with it, and you will still qualify for forgiveness and meet the rules. Next slide, please.
Just a reminder, that's for payroll costs only, not for the non-payroll costs.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Okay, next one, payroll costs. So this is, they gave us a little more guidance here on payroll costs. All right, so payroll costs incurred during the 8-week covered period or alternate covered period. Payroll costs are considered paid on the day that the paychecks are distributed or the borrower originates an ACH. But look at the bold down there. Payroll costs are considered incurred on the day that the employee's pay is earned. Let's keep that in mind. Incurred but not paid during the last pay of the covered period are eligible for forgiveness if we do it before the next payroll date. We've already talked about that. So we got a little bit of an administrative mulligan on that. Next slide, please, Amy. So otherwise, they have to be paid during the covered period or alternate covered period. Remember that the owners and any employees actually whose salaries are more than $100,000, that's all you can take into account. So the maximum amount of compensation you can get is $15,385, period. Count payroll costs that were paid and incurred only once. And then they give you a reference back to one of the guidance rules. Next slide, please, Amy. So observations. Next slide. So Scott, if someone got their money like 4 weeks ago and they haven't paid any payroll yet, I don't think that we're allowed to do a catch-up. I mean, we've gotten, Megan, you've gotten emails, Scott, you've gotten emails, I'm sure Dan, you've gotten emails that said, well, here's what I'm going to do. When I open my dental office after 5 weeks of having this money, I'm just going to, back pay everybody for 5 weeks. I don't think under that definition that I just read that says that payroll is paid, is incurred when earned. So if you give someone 5 weeks of payroll on May 19th when you get the money, 5 weeks of payroll wasn't earned on May 19th, and that wasn't the intention of the law, right? Is that your interpretation?
Yeah, it's to get people off unemployment. And so if you've left those people on unemployment for 5 weeks and then want to also back pay them for the 5 weeks, that was not the intent of the CARES Act. Now, bonuses, I don't know if there'll be a finite. We're looking for guidance to see if there's any sort of finite, maybe dollar amount or percentage of salary, maybe for bonuses to, create goodwill with your employees who made more money off unemployment, then we're still waiting for that. But the back pay, I agree with you. I don't think that will be allowed.
Okay, so
And
next,
hazard pay as well. So I think that you can consider hazard pay, maybe some additional amount, or thanks for coming back, like you said, Megan, bonus for getting you back on payroll. I think if it's a business case scenario and you need to pay someone to get them off unemployment, then I think that's a business reason to get them back onto payroll.
yeah,
So
I mean, that's
hoping
something
there's
we were
some
talking about,
flexibility.
Scott. You get an employee who says to you, and I'm not playing labor attorney, but you get an employee who says to you, I'm making $300 a month more on this than I'm making on unemployment. What would the government say if you said, all right, I'm going to give you an extra $300 a month? Now that opens Pandora's box, because if you give it to employee 1, then do you have to give it to employees 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? So I don't want to go down that road, but people are going to make choices. Let's go to the next slide. So again, this is just what Megan said. They want you to put people back as soon as possible. And this is what we're talking about. Can we give them a retention bonus or a hazard pay bonus? Maybe they'll say we can give up to 10% of the wages in the covered period as a bonus. If that's the case, that's going to help get people to 75%. Scott, I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of these calculations that people have sent me using our PPP spreadsheet. And by the way, if you want our PPP planning spreadsheet, we've got one. I know Ide's got one. We'll be happy available to you. Just email us or call Scott or I or your Eide Bailly CPA or your HMWC CPA. Again, a shout out to Don Watson, Pam Chamberlain, Sam Williams, who have been absolutely warriors during this whole thing and taken hundreds of phone calls. They'll get them to you too. Can we pay a retention bonus or a hazard pay bonus? Maybe. Don't know. If the employee agrees to come back to work with the potential danger working in a dental office, would a bonus be reasonable? I would make the argument that it would be, but it's not up to me. So until we get the guidance, gee, that sounds familiar. How many times have we said that? We don't know. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the gist of the presentation today, folks. After reading through these documents, this document, and reading an article, and by the way, I'm gonna suggest there's a gentleman who writes for Forbes magazine. His name is Tony Nitti, N-I-T-T-I. I'd love to meet this guy someday because he's probably a hoot. I can just tell by the way he writes. He is I believe is a CPA and it might be a tax attorney, but he takes very complex financial and tax information and makes it simple. He wrote a great article that's in Forbes. If you were to Google PPP forgiveness application, Forbes magazine, Tony Nitti, you would probably find it. I read it about 5 times. It's got some really good examples. It's got some really good stuff. If you want to understand this in plain English, and if what I'm saying to you is just too confusing, which it is. So there are basically, let's wrap our heads around this 35,000 foot concept. There are, if you do not, there are 3 things that will reduce your forgiveness. Number 1 is if you pay your employees 25% or more less money. I don't know if that's proper English. If you pay them less than 75% during the 8-week covered period, annualized, then you paid them for the first quarter, there will be a reduction. 2, if you don't have the same number of full-time equivalent employees on June 30th as compared to prior to the pandemic, February 15th, and we're going to go through these in detail, you will have a reduction. Number 3, if you have payroll costs that are less than 75% of the total loan amount during the covered period, you will have a reduction. Next slide, please. So let's get into this. And we'll make these PowerPoints will be available, I believe, on our websites. So reduction number 1, 25% reduction. So if you reduce an employee's average annual salary by more than 25%, so we're comparing the first quarter, the 8 weeks to that you get the money to the first quarter of 2020. Now, when they initially came out with this in the CARES bill, one of my best friends and my golfing buddy is a labor attorney. He said, Art, this is not fair. In the bill, they're comparing an 8-week period to a 13-week period. Remember, Megan, we've talked about this. Well, they fixed that by using an annualized number. So I think they got that right. So if you were to pay, and we're going to go through a mathematical example here shortly. There is also, if you did pay people less, you didn't bring everybody back, or you brought them back part-time, you're a restaurant, you're a dental office, you bring them back part-time, there is a safe harbor. If you return the employee to what their salary or wage was on June 30th, as to what it was on February 15th, you meet a safe harbor and there is no reduction. And we use the salary the same way as hourly. So this is only for employees that make less than $100,000 a year. I don't know what kind of documentation they're going to require to show. Do we say that your front office administrator was making 80 grand a year and on June 30th they're making 80 grand and then we drop them back down to 50? I don't think that'll fly, but we'll see. Next slide, please. So here's a mathematical example. Our front office administrator for the period of January 1 to March 31 was made $20,000. Their annualized salary was $80,000 a year. You paid the front office administrator during the 8-week period $1,000 a week because he or she was only working part-time. They weren't as busy. So they made $8,000, which is annualized $52,000. So during the 8-week period, when we annualize the salary of 52, comparing it to the annualized salary of 80 for the first quarter, that's only 65%. So therefore, Scott, my reduction is greater than 25%. So I have the potential for a reduction here. How do I calculate the reduction? And you have to do this on an employee by employee basis. So if you have a dental office that's doing $10 million and you've got 50 employees, you have to do this for every one of your employees. So 80,000 times 75% is 60,000. That's the minimum I would have been able to pay this person annualized for the 8-week period. I take the 60,000, which is my minimum that I can pay to meet the 75% rule and not reduced by more than 25%, minus the 52,000, which is my annualized salary based on what I paid them during the 8 weeks. That's 8,000. And then I calculate that, divide that by 52 times 8 weeks, and my reduction for this one employee is $1,230. Now, if her payroll during the covered period was the equivalent of 80,000 a year, or at least 60, if we paid her the equivalent of at least 60,000 during the 8 weeks, she doesn't have a reduction of more than 25%, and we don't have to worry about it. Or if we meet the safe harbor, which is that we're putting her back on payroll at $80,000 salary on June 30th, that's the safe harbor. But Megan and Scott, we don't know. What does that mean? Does that mean that the SBA is going to require in their guidance that, you know, we can't just put them back on salary for one day at 80,000 and then bump her back down to 52? That defeats the spirit of this, right? So what I suspect they might say is, this employee must be, and you must show to the bank that for 30 days, this employee was paid $80,000 a year. Don't know. We'll have to see what happens. Next slide, please. And this is the safe harbor. So under the safe harbor, that same employee was making $75,000, a different employee, on February 15th. And their salary was $55,000 annualized for the period of February 15th to April 26th. This gets really gnarly, folks. So if you return that employee's salary to what it was on February 15th, again, this is a different example, $75,000, and you either meet that you don't reduce their salaries by 25%, or you put them back on payroll for what it was on February 15th, you will not have a reduction. So the key is you either meet the safe harbor and put them back on payroll, or even better, you make sure they make more than 75% annualized for the 8-week period than what they made annualized for the first quarter. Need more guidance? Next slide, please. So that's the first reduction, folks. So that's the first place that you're going to have a place where you can reduce your forgiveness. If you keep in your minds that it's 3 different reductions, and 3 places where we're going to lose forgiveness. And if we can defeat those 3, we will have the maximum opportunity to have 100% of this loan forgiven, except for your EIDL grant. Number 2 is the full-time equivalent. And they threw us a bone, Megan and Scott, didn't they? So they basically said that you count employees based on the percentage of time they work. They first of all defined a full-time equivalent employee as someone who works 40 hours a week, which is interesting because in many SBA scenarios, they were using 30 hours a week from what I remember from my old SBA days, but this is 40 hours. Now, 40 hours is the traditional amount of time that people work in this country. If you were to say to the majority of people who work in this country, how many hours of work do you work? 40 hours. But in dentistry, it doesn't work that way. The vast, vast majority, 98% of the people in dentistry probably work 32 or 36 hours a week. Or if your office is open 3 days a week, it's 24 hours a week, right? So you can, round it to the next 10th. So then we have a safe harbor. So let's go to that because that's really where everybody's going to fall. Next slide, please, Amy. So we now have a simplified method. Wait, there's something simplified in all of this? Shocking. So here's what they said, and this is right out of the application. The full-time equivalency calculation goes as follows. If you elect the simplified method, I think that Megan and Scott, to elect it, there's no box you check on this. You just do it. You just say, I'm using the simplified method. There might be some more things you have to file. I don't know yet, but I don't think so. So any employee who works less than 40 hours a week, 39 and a half hours a week, they are a 0.5. Anybody who works more than 40 or more hours is a 1.0. So a simplified method assigns a 1.0. So if you have an employee who works 40, 45 hours a week, they are 1 full-time equivalent. Anybody who works less than that, any less than 40, is a 0.5. And I'm going to show you here why this could be of great advantage to you. Now, this is where you get your Tylenol and your Advil. Most of you are going to want to use the simplified employee. So in doing the reduction calculation, you compare the average full-time employees employed during your 8 weeks to the number of full-time employees you had during one of 2 periods, and you get to choose. And this is right out of the CARES Act, either from February 15th of 2019 to June 30th of 2019, or from January 1 of 2020 to February 29th of 2020. Next slide, please, Amy. So here's the example. Dr. Wiederman's team we had the same number of people working for these 2 periods, February 15th to June 30th and January 1 to February 29th of 2020. So we had the same number of people. We had two full-time front office administrators who worked 32 hours a week. So they counted as a 0.8 if we didn't use this simplified method. So they're at 1.6. 2 full-time back office, 32 hours a week, and 2 full-time hygienists, 32 hours a week. So under this example, if I don't use the simplified method, I had 4.8 full-time equivalent employees for before the pandemic. But under the simplified method, because all of these employees worked less than 40 hours a week before the pandemic, I only have 3 full-time employees. And remember, we want less. Less is better here. So now we go to the covered period, May 1 to June 30th. Let's say you got your money on May 1 or whatever that is. And I come back and I go, I don't need as many people. We're not as busy. Okay, so I have 1 20-hour-a-week office administrator. So that person counts as a 0.5. I have another 20-hour-a-week. And if they worked 30 hours, they would still count as a 0.5. I have another 20-hour-a-week administrator. So they count as a 0.5. I bring back 2 part-time office assistants. They qualify each as a 0.5. So that's 1.0. And I bring my hygienist back half-time because my hygiene schedule isn't this full. So that is also 1.0. So look at this, folks. I had 6 employees working 32 hours a week, in my mind, full time. I come back and I now have 6 employees working half time. I'm half as busy. So one would think that if I've got people working half the time, I'm going to not have as many full-time equivalents, but I have the same number, because no matter whether you work 32 hours a week or 20 hours a week or 5 hours a week, that's a 0.5. Next slide, please.
And one of the reminders, it might be here in the subsequent slides, is, well, what happens if the employee doesn't want to come back, for an hour or 2 a week? And there is that safe harbor where if you give them that written offer and they decline it, that they're taken out of this calculation for the before period and for that tested cover period.
Right, and Scott, that's a great point. So everybody, what I want you to do is I want you to read frequently asked question on treasury.gov. What you do is you go onto frequently asked, you go onto the treasury.gov website. At the top, there's a red little strip at the top that says COVID-19. Click on that, and then it brings you to all the guidance that we've gotten over the last 8 weeks. And go to frequently asked questions. It's been updated. Last time was May 13th, Megan. We check this way too often. And basically, question number 40 is this: you need to make a written offer of employment to people. They need to decline it. You need to document it, and they need to make a good faith effort. If they do that and they don't come back, then you can exclude them from the FTE calculation. So in my example, I have 6 full-time people before the pandemic. Then I have 6 part-time people for the 8 weeks after the pandemic. So for each period, under the simplified method, I have 3.00, which is 6 people times 0.5, because everybody's a 0.5, whether they work 32 hours a week, 36 hours a week, or 20 hours a week. If we don't use this simplified method, then I have 3 full-time employees, because they're each working 0.5 half time, divided by 4.8, which is 62.5, which is a significant reduction in the forgiveness amount, which you'll see when we go to the example. Now, again, the safe harbor is if you bring everybody back by, and let's go to the next slide, because I think that's the safe harbor, if I remember. Yeah. So if you bring everybody back by June 30th, and you have the same number of FTEs on June 30th as you had before June 30th, on February 15th, then you're going to meet this test. Let's go to the next slide, because I think we talk about this. Yeah. So how are they going to verify, guys? How are they going to verify if you had how many FTEs you had on June 30th? So one of my buddies in our dental CPA group suggested that they could hire everybody back for 1 day on June 30th and have a pizza party. I love pizza. Let's have a pizza party, and then lay them off the next day. Well, they had the same number of full-time employees on June 30th. That's what it says, right, Scott and Megan? Do you think that's how it's going to work? I don't think so.
Probably not.
We're waiting for the guidance as to how they're going to approach this. Are they going to require that employees be on the payroll for a month before and a month after? I don't know. We'll have to see. But the bottom line is, for test number 2, if you hire everybody back with the same number of people, doesn't have to be the same people. You're going to have people who are not going to come back to your dental office. That is a fact. They're going to be afraid. They're not going to want to work. They might want to retire. They don't have to work in dentistry, whatever. They can be different people. As long as you have the same number of bodies meeting this FTE rule, then you will avoid the forgiveness. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Hey, I have a question that I've gotten more times than I can count on my toes and my fingers. If people aren't coming back and I can't find anybody, can I hire my kids or my spouse who have not been on payroll before to fill those numbers?
That is a great question, Scott, and I am glad you asked that. Oh my gosh. Well, Megan, you and I have talked about related party rules. Scott, you and I have talked about related party rules. I think if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck is probably the answer there. if you're short of the 75%, which we're going to talk about in a minute, if you're short of that and you just say, well, I'm going to bring my 5 nephews in and pay them to get to the 75%, I don't know if that works. But if you have a legitimate need for an employee and your 28-year-old son or daughter was laid off from their job, and remember, we got 36 million people on unemployment right now, which will go up on Thursday, and you hire your son or daughter and they legitimately work in your office, I would think you could. But again, we'll see what the SBA says. I think that's a great question. We don't know. And that's why it's so important to get this guidance. All right, reduction number 3, we have to pay at least 75% of the total loan amount in payroll costs, period. So limited to $15,385 for employees and self-employed people, partners who earn more than $100,000. Now, what are payroll costs again? Scott, why don't you go through this slide?
Sure. Yeah, just like we spoke about a little bit ago, payroll costs are that $15,385 for the covered period per employee that is making less than $100,000 a year. And then also the state unemployment taxes. And then the third and fourth items are the employer paid health insurance premiums for employees, as well as the employer paid retirement plan contributions. And we're still waiting on guidance there. That's one of the questions we got a lot of inquiries about is, can I do my profit share for 19 during this covered period?
Yeah.
Is it a portion of that? Can I do 20 or profit contribution for 20? Can I do it early? We don't know yet, and we're still waiting for future guidance. Hopefully it's coming out soon.
Yeah, soon.
Yeah.
Soon. Soon is the operative word. Next slide, please. So this is interesting. The guidance from the SBA seems to indicate that they discriminated against sole proprietors, independent contractors, and partners in partnerships or LLCs. So if you read the April 24th interim guidance, it tells you how to calculate how much you're applying for a PPP loan, which is absurd because by that time everybody had already applied. But what it did is it gave us an idea of how Treasury and SBA was thinking about these different entities. So it appears from the guidance that we have that if you are a partner in a partnership, a sole proprietor, or an independent contractor, you will not be able to count your health insurance premium or your retirement plan contribution in your forgiveness amount. However, if you are an S corporation shareholder or a C corporation shareholder dentist, you will be, because when they did those calculations, they gave you the actual line numbers, and they said you deduct the amount on line, I think it was 17 of the S corp form or 18, whatever it was, for the pension, and that includes the owner's contribution. Whereas for a sole proprietor or a partner or an independent contractor, those go as an adjustment to income on your 1040, and they don't go on a line of the 1065. So the calculation, basically the lower amount that you pay your employees during the 8-week period of this money, the more your forgiveness is going to be reduced. Now, we're going to get into an example of how we do this here in a minute. We're not really sure about the health insurance for the S corps, but we're definitely not sure about retirement plan contributions. Because if they say we want you to do your 2020 contribution, my answer would be, are you kidding me? Have you heard SBA that there's a pandemic? Have you heard my dental office has been shut down? Have you heard my revenues are going to be down dramatically this year? I'm not making any pension contribution. I hope they allow to at least take 850 seconds of last year's contribution. We'll see. Next slide. All right, so rent and utilities. This is interesting. All right, these are called eligible non-payroll costs, and they opened a door, I think, Scott and Megan, and I want your opinions on this. So this is right out of the application. An eligible non-payroll cost, and this is rent, utilities, and interest. An eligible non-payroll cost must be paid during the covered period, and there's in bold and underline, or, so let's stop here, must be paid during the covered period, or which means that it can be just paid during the covered period. Is that how you guys read this?
Yeah, and that conflicts to what I've seen previously in the law.
Yeah, it does.
Paid and incurred.
Right.
Prior to this application.
Or incurred during the covered period and paid on or before the next regular billing date. So they're going to give you the same mulligan for the payroll here with the rent and the utilities. We'll get to this in a minute. So, and again, we're limited to 25% of this PPP money to be used for these eligible non-payroll costs. So if I get a utility bill for the month of June that's due on July 15th, and the covered period ends on June 25th, I can pay that utility bill by July 15th. I believe you have to pay it on time, and it will count as a part of your forgivable, eligible non-payroll costs, which is another reason, folks, why you don't want to file your forgiveness application on June 30th for a couple of reasons. Number one, we want to find out, Dan, how you guys, when you get these applications, where are the bugs going to be? You know, it's kind of like we're doing a new computer program, PPP Forgiveness 1.0, and you're going to look at the bugs, and you're going to tell the SBA, and the 5,000 banks are going to tell the SBA what's going on, and maybe they'll come out with some more guidance during that time and say, oh well, yeah, we missed this, so let's make it this. So you don't want to file for forgiveness on June 30th. You want to see what's happening, talk to the banks, and make sure that all of your payments that are paid after your covered period are included and can be allowed for forgiveness. So there's no rush. Read your loan document. Make sure you file within the period. I'm guessing most of you will have 30 to 60 days, but read your loan document. So with this language, you get your money on May 4th and you haven't paid your April rent. A lot of you haven't paid your April rent yet. This seems to say, maybe, possibly, that you could pay your April rent with this money. And as long as we're on a roll here, what if my covered period ends June 28th? Can I pay my July rent? Maybe. I wouldn't do any of that until we saw the guidance. But if they stick to that literal interpretation that's right up there that I'm making, maybe we can get 3 or 4 months rent out of this. And also, folks, if they extend the period from 8 weeks to 16 or 24, you are going to get 3, 4, 5, 6 months of rent. So here's another thing, Scott. If they have deferred rent, we have clients who have gone to their landlords and said, can I defer my rent? Yeah, pay me half rent for May and June, and you'll make it up in July, August, and September. Well, you may want to go back to the landlord and say, listen, the government's letting me pay this money. I'd like to pay my May and June rent. Can we redo this and give me my deferral in August, September, October when I'm really going to need it? So that's something you should take into consideration. We need the guidance. Next slide, please. Again, so here's the comprehensive example of how this works. So let's go up on the, let's go up, Amy, to the Excel spreadsheet. I'm sorry, let's not do that yet. Let's go to the next slide. So you didn't know this, Scott, but you and I have a dental group. Did you know that?
All right. Hopefully it's making money.
All right, Scott, are you? do you do implants, Scott? Do you do sleep apnea? I don't know. All right, so I created this scenario. So Scott and I have a dental partnership. We got $140,000, and let's forget entities for a minute, just for the example. We got a $140,000 PPP loan today on May 19th. During the 8-week period, we spent $80,000. I created 2 scenarios. Scenario 1. We spent $80,000 on payroll costs. We didn't hire everybody back until the office opened in early June or mid-June, okay? We spent $20,000 on eligible non-payroll costs, $5,000 on interest, $10,000 on rent, and $5,000 on utilities. So on the appropriate measurement dates prior to the pandemic, February to June of 19 or January to February of 20, we had 8 full-time equivalent employees. On June 30th, we only had 7, so we didn't hire everybody back. Everybody who works at Wiederman and Haberman on June 30th were paid the same hourly wage and salary as they were on February 15th, so we met the safe harbor, so there's no reduction here. and we got an $8,000 EIDL grant. Scott, I think you and I bought season tickets to the Colorado Rockies with that. Isn't that what we did?
Yeah, for the partial season.
Partial season, yeah. Yeah, there you go. So no, we didn't do that. So at the end of the 8-week period, we spent $100,000. I got $40,000 left. Due to economic conditions, we want to keep this for working capital. Amy, would you go to the PowerPoint, please? And we're going to show you line by line how this form works. So, okay. So Amy, can we make that a little bigger? I don't know if you can or you can't.
It doesn't look like it. Oh,
okay.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So scenario number 1, and this goes right to the line numbers. So line 1, my payroll costs, I spent $80,000 on payroll costs, and that includes payroll, state taxes, health insurance, and retirement. I spent $5,000 on mortgage interest. That's line 2. These line numbers correspond exactly to the forgiveness form that we put up. I spent $10,000 on rent. I spent $5,000 on utilities. So I spent $100,000 of this money. And remember, I have $40,000 left, right, Scott? We didn't spend it all. Now, what's my FTE reduction quotient? Remember, I told you guys that we had 8 full-time equivalent employees on February 15th, and we have 7 on June 30th. So 7/8, that fraction is 7 divided by 8, which is 87.5%. So my first reduction is happening here. Now, back to line 5, we have no salary hourly wage reduction because we had everybody back on the same salary on June 30th, or we didn't reduce anybody's payroll by more than 25%. If we did, like that one employee, we would have put $1,230 there, and that would have reduced that. So the first reduction, the salary hourly wage reduction, we don't have a reduction. The second one is on line, and that's line 5. Line 7 is the full-time equivalent reduction. So that is, I lost $12,500 of my forgiveness right there. 1/8. I have 1 out of 8 employees didn't come back. They want you to put everybody back on payroll by June 30th. So I lose $12,500 there, okay? Line 9, I put in my PPP loan amount, which is $140,000. Then what we do is we figure out the third reduction, which is the 75%. So I'm going to take line 1. I spent $80,000 on payroll costs. I divided it by 75%, and that means that's $106,667. So I got $140,000. They wanted me to spend 75% of that on payroll costs, which is significantly higher, okay, than 80,000. So I am dinged to 106,667. So that is my second comparison. So my loan forgiveness is the lesser of the 140,000, the loan I got. The ding I took from the payroll costs, which was 106,667. And the loan forgiveness is what really killed me here, and that's 87,500. So 87,500 out of the 140,000 in my example is what will be forgiven minus my $8,000 EIDL grant loan. So Amy, would you go back to the PowerPoint for a second, please? Thank you. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So now let's do scenario number 2. All right, except in this example, same thing, but we used 110,000 of the 140 for payroll costs. We hired the entire team back as soon as they got their PPP money, and we hired everybody back. We had 8 full-time equivalent employees on June 30th. We had 8 full-time equivalent employees on February 15th. And we had no employees with greater than a 25% reduction in wages because we hired everybody back. And so I spent 130 of this 140, and I have 10,000 left. Let's go back to the spreadsheet, Amy, please. So let's go down it again. 110 in payroll costs, 20,000 in non-payroll costs. Line 6 is 130. But my FTE reduction quotient is 1.0. There is no reduction. So I'm at, multiply 6 by 7, I'm at 130. So now, what about line number 10? If I take the 110 divided by 75%, I'm at 146, which means I met my 75% rule. And you can play with these numbers any way you want. This spreadsheet will be available. This PowerPoint will be available. So the loan forgiveness is the lesser of line 8, 9, or 10. The 130, okay, the 140, which is the loan, or the 146. Well, it should be 130 because I got 10,000 left. So minus 8,000. So my forgiveness is 122,000. This is your full forgiveness scenario, folks. I got 140. I spent it the way the government wanted me to spend it. I spent 130 of it. I got 10,000 left. Let's go back to the PowerPoint and we'll finish this thing off. Next slide, please. Okay, so scenario 1 leaves me with a 2-year loan at 1% interest with, again, Megan, the caveat that they're talking about expanding that to 5 years, but that has not been done yet. We'll see. That was in the Democrats' proposal. So I had a loan of 140. I'm being forgiven 79,500. I'm sorry. I'm being forgiven 79,500. That's right. So 60,500 is the amount of the loan that I have. You have to pay this back. Where do I get that number? I've still got $40,000 that I haven't used. Makes sense I should pay that back because it's a loan. I have the $12,500 reduction because of the fact that I only had 7 FTEs instead of 8 FTEs and on June 30th. So that's 40 plus 12.5 is 52.5 plus the $8,000 idle loan, which was free money and is being reduced. That's my 60,000. If I choose to return the money to the bank, then my 1% 2-year loan is 20,500. I think I got that right, guys. Does that seem right to you? Okay, next slide, please. In scenario number 2, we spent more than 75% of the PPP money on payroll costs. We've hired back the same number of FTEs. We didn't reduce anybody's salaries by 25% or more. In this case, I get full forgiveness, the 130 minus the idle grant. Now, at this point, I can repay the 40,000 or the 10,000 in my examples. I can maybe find a way to spend the rest of it. Maybe we pay the retention bonus. Maybe we can pay an additional month of rent. We'll have to see what the guidance says. Or I take it as a 2-year, 1% loan. Next slide, please. So let's put a bow around this. Here's the takeaways. It comes back to what we've been saying for the last 2 months, folks. If you pay more than 75% of the funds towards your payroll costs, you bring back your full-time employees by June 30th, and you restore their salary and hourly wage to what it was in February, you're probably going to get full forgiveness, what we've been saying all along. If you don't hire your people back at full pay, you're going to have less forgiveness, and you're going to have to pay the money back based on these 3 factors. Using the simplified method for calculating your FTEs is the way you want to go. 40 hours per week, this helps you in a situation where you bring back somebody at 50% and they're the same number of FTEs, okay? And once we have the guidance, we're gonna dive deeper into this. Scott, Megan, hopefully by next Tuesday, we hope. Yeah, Megan.
Hopefully not Tuesday morning.
Yeah, Tuesday morning about 10. This is where you set your hair on fire, right, Megan?
Yeah, because they usually do it at 11:30 at night, even if they do it during the week. So.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And you're still up, thankfully, when I email you at 11:30 Eastern.
Oh my God, yes, I am. Yeah, because I have no life and I have to look at this. No, I actually did play golf this weekend. It was good. Next slide. I think that's.
I think one of the other items on there, Art, is to maintain.
Amy, do we have to get off at 12:30?
You can go about 5 minutes over.
All right, let's go 5 minutes over. I like that idea. Go ahead,
So
Scott.
maintain your documentation for 6 years is the requirement on the loan application. So just keep that in mind too.
And documentation is key. We're going to put together, I put together the PPP planning spreadsheet. We also have a PPP tracking spreadsheet, which I'm not prepared to send out to anybody yet because of the fact that I want to wait for the guidance and see if it changes anything. And what that's going to allow you to do is, as you pay things, to document it on this spreadsheet, and it'll show you how much have you spent after the first payroll, how much after the first payroll and your first rent payment, how much after your first payroll and your retirement plan payment. So we go down the list, and maybe you have 10 or 15 entries, because that's all you're going to have, folks. You're going to have, if you pay weekly, you're going to have, the most you'll have is 8 payrolls. Again, notwithstanding if they expand this to 16 or 24 weeks. You're going to have maybe 1 or 2 pension contributions. You're going to have 3 or 4 utility bills, 5 I don't know. But it's not going to be a ton of entries. It's not going to be hundreds of entries. It's going to be 10 to 20 entries maybe. And then we'll be able to, at each point, show you how much do you have left and what percentage have you spent. And we will actually hopefully use this to submit to the banks possibly. So Dan, I'm going to try and make your life easier, believe it or not. All right. Any final comments, folks? I hope I haven't made you throw up or want to go do some harm to your. I mean, really, this form is a beast. I will tell you this. Scott and his team and all the wonderful folks at Eide Bailly and myself and Pam and Dawn and Sam, we're here for you. We're going to do everything we can to help you through this, to get you not only where you want to be in your practice, because remember, after 8 weeks, this money is gone and we move on to the rest of our lives. But our objective is to do whatever we can to maximize the forgiveness of this loan based on how you choose, and I make a very, very strong point here, how you choose to spend this money. So we're here. Are our phone numbers here anywhere, or contact information, Amy? Yeah, let's put that up for a little bit. So that's how you can get a hold of me, how you can go get a hold of Megan and Dan. Dan is going to be really, really important. He has been important all along. When we get to the forgiveness part and giving us guidance as we go along here on how, what you have to submit. Folks, documentation is key. Every single time you pay a bill that you believe is for PPP forgiveness, put it in a separate file, have it hermetically sealed, save it, because basically, Dan, and this is important, you're going to have a bunch of underwriters. They're, with all due respect, they're not going to understand how all this works the way the 4 of us do. They're just not. They're going to be given a set of rules. They're going to be given hundreds of files, right? That's how this is going to happen.
Thousands, yep.
Thousands of files. And your file, doctor, is going to be number 128657. And they want to get through as many files as their boss, supervisor, tells them to do in a day. And they're going to say, oh, you blew this, bump, next one. So documentation and organization, just like when you go to the IRS, is key. Any final comments, guys? I think we got this pretty much right, I hope, for today. Megan, can you go knock on Donald's door and see if he'll kind of give us throw us a bone here or something? I don't know.
I don't know if he's the one running the show with this, so.
Yeah, well, have you ever met Treasury Secretary Mnuchin?
I have not. We don't usually hang in the same circles.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Megan. You and I become friends in the last 2 months, and we've been on God knows how many webinars and emailing and texting about, this, and you've been unbelievable as far as getting us information as it happens. In my wildest dreams. Thank you, Alan Schiff, president of the Academy of Dental CPAs, for introducing us to Megan. Thanks to the ADA for everything that you are doing, the hard work you're doing for dentists, your 163,000 members across the country. It's amazing. Anything new from the ADA real quick, Megan, that might be of interest that's not says PPP?
We did update the toolkit a bit. So if you did, you should have received an updated toolkit, but if for some reason you didn't in the last week or so, it's the reopen toolkit. Please visit the site and reapply to receive one.
Okay. Dan, any final thoughts from you before we sign off today?
No, great information. If any of you do have a loan with me through Ready Capital, please calling my number. I actually have an outgoing message right now that says to email me instead because it's just impossible to answer all the calls. So just please be patient with that, and I'll definitely get back to you as soon as I can.
All right, Mr. Scott, great job today. What any final thoughts from you?
Just stay in touch with your banker, stay in touch with us. And if you have any questions, email me, call me, text me. We're all here for you guys. We're all in this together, and we're gonna get through it together.
And Amy, I have one question for you. There's about 22 questions that we weren't able to get to today. Do I have access to these questions after the webinar is done?
I will send them to you.
Would you please? And I will do
Yes.
my best. Folks, be patient. I will do my best to, so if I answer them, how do I get them out to people? Is that going to be possible?
I'll give you their contact information and their question.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll do our best. So, all right. On behalf of Eide Bailly, CPAs, HMWC, CPAs, and business advisors, God bless you, every one of you in the dental profession. Thank you for listening and attending our webinars, for the kind words we've gotten. We really appreciate it. Thank you to Scott Haberman, Megan Mortimer, Dan Bywater, Amy DeGeorge, and everybody at Eide Bailly who has put these. I mean, I sent this PowerPoint, this information over to turn to a PowerPoint, and it was amazing, absolutely amazing. What you guys have done with this in such a short period of time. So from all of us at Eide Bailly and HMWC, we'll see you next Tuesday. Same bat time, same bat channel. Have a wonderful day, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.